Hello and welcome to this DW News live stream on what is the very latest on the Iran war. I'm Alex Forrest-Whiting.
And I'm Girish Banerjee.
It's day 5 of this conflict, which is escalating by the hour. Israel says it's hit dozens of military targets across Iran.
And the Israel Defense Forces is also attacking Lebanon and has warned people in southern Beirut to evacuate.
Meanwhile, Iran continues to attack US military bases and embassies across the Gulf, with civilian infrastructure also being targeted. We'll be speaking to our correspondents in Israel and the United Arab Emirates.
We'll also talk to an analyst from Dubai about how the Gulf countries are dealing with the missile and drone attacks from Iran. And we also want, like we do with our live streams, your comments and questions in the community chat so we can bring them into the discussion and put them to our guests.
Yes, please do put those messages and questions in. That would be really great. And let's just begin first with Spain, because Spain's Prime Minister Pedro Sanchez has delivered a stinging criticism of the US-led war on Iran. This after Spain refused to allow the US to use joint military bases in the country for launching attacks on Iran. Now, that prompted a threat by President Trump to halt all US trade with Spain. Well, Prime Minister Sanchez said the war is wrong and that Madrid will not be involved or be intimidated.
The position of the Spanish government can be summarized in 4 words: no to the war. You cannot play Russian roulette with the destiny of millions. We're not going to be complicit in something that's bad for the world and contrary to our values and interests, simply to avoid reprisals from someone.
Well, that was Sanchez there speaking as Prime Minister of Spain. And we're joined now on the line from Brussels by our correspondent, Terry Schultz. Blistering criticism there, Terry. Is Sanchez alone, do you think, in those views on this whole incident with Iran and what the US is doing, as well as Israel?
I don't think that he's alone in his views, but he is certainly alone in sticking his neck out that far to criticize the Trump administration and Israel for these strikes. No one else has been willing to say exactly those things. Other countries have shown that they are uncomfortable with the strikes, that they don't believe that they were in accordance with international law. We've also heard that from the European Union's highest leaders, but nobody has been as strong as Pedro Sanchez. Now, this isn't the first time we've seen the Spanish leader do that. Of course, you might remember, as President Trump clearly did last summer at the NATO summit in The Hague, where Spain flatly refused to go up to 5% of defense spending when all the other members of NATO did so. So this isn't unfamiliar territory for Spain, and the White House seems to think it can make him pay a price for this.
I mean, we've had German Chancellor Friedrich Merz in the White House, and Trump was actually pouring out praise on him. Do you think that this war is causing new divisions within Europe?
Well, he was pouring out praise on Merz as he lambasted Pedro Sanchez at the same time. And there's plenty of commentary this morning on how Friedrich Merz basically just sat there and let one of his allies and partners be criticized like that. Of course, everybody knows what happens when you stand up to Trump, particularly in the White House. If we recall what happened to, of course, Ukrainian President Zelensky, nobody wants to be in that Zelensky spot. So you can understand why Merz perhaps didn't rise to a robust defense of Pedro Sanchez's position. But again, I don't know if the gulf is as wide between what leaders think about this U.S. military operation as what they're willing to do about it. And clearly, Friedrich Merz was quite relieved to be getting praised for allowing the United States to use German bases. And we, in fact, did see more than a dozen planes relocate from the 2 Spanish bases that are jointly operated with the U.S. yesterday and fly to Ramstein. So Germany clearly taking a much more lenient position on what the U.S. can do. Again, there are other bases and other allies saying that they would prefer that their bases only be used for defensive reasons. So we'll see as this war goes on whether the Trump administration is able to convince European leaders to change their views and allow perhaps offensive strikes from European bases.
Yeah, because there's also been this whole issue, hasn't there, with the British Prime Minister Keir Starmer.
Exactly.
Of course, the UK normally being one of the US's staunchest supporters and allies, and yet he had this very difficult situation with Trump. How much do you think the US needs its European NATO allies and, of course, their facilities, the UK, of course, having this base in Cyprus?
Yeah, the UK, and in fact, Keir Starmer did change his view on this. He first said that the bases could not be used. Then he allowed some limited use of those bases and also the one in Diego Garcia in the Chagos Islands. And he didn't want to have to make that decision, clearly very uncomfortable for him. And again, Starmer, we shouldn't forget, was also on the firing line for President Trump yesterday in the White House. And again, Merz did not stand up for him, something that has been noted. I was actually surprised at the vociferousness of Trump's criticism of Starmer, given that he had reversed his position and allowed the U.S. to use his bases. Now, Starmer may be facing problems at home on whether he had allowed only defensive use or, again, offensive use. And those are something I'm sure that the Trump administration isn't going to be so clear on the lines and on the conversations that it's had with its allies. Of course, it makes it much easier for the United States if it's allowed to operate from European bases, which are much closer to the Middle East than the United States, and it does have access to German bases. It's the stronghold of the U.S. military in Europe, and it seems that that Chancellor Merz has not put limitations on what the U.S. can do from the German bases.
Terry, it's just so good to have you on the line talking to us about the European perspective. Biresh, I just want to sort of bring in what our viewers are saying in the community chat, and they're also seizing on this whole aspect of European unity, disunity, and what was directed at Spain. So let me just read out a few of these things. Let's begin with Chris Hunt, who starts with Viva España. It's a good way to open the comments. Then you have Seki Machan saying Spain doesn't want to be involved in order not to end up with their country getting ruined by its aftermath. There is also somebody, a sort of Daz, talking about saying it's good to see the Spanish government not supporting the Trump agenda. And then there is also a question here, and if I can find it, this is from RD3, and you did allude to it already in your answers, but I wonder if you can expand on it a bit. What do you make of the mixed messaging coming out of Europe, with Spain openly criticizing US actions, while Merz didn't push back when Trump took a swipe at Spain yesterday? See you smiling, so I think you have something to say.
Well, again, who wants to be Friedrich Merz, thinking back to what happened to President Zelensky when he stood up for himself in the Oval Office? I think there could be, Merz will probably be given a pass by many for not wanting to, on live television, possibly open himself up to criticism. And also, there's this thinking in European leaders that what good does it do us to create more divisions with Trump when we could, make our case better if he, has a positive view of us. That seemed to be what Merz was saying yesterday, because he did say that he wanted to bring up the trade deal, which, of course, has been torpedoed by President Trump's unilateral tariffs against the European Union. Merz tried to make his points at the beginning of that meeting, saying that he wanted to talk about these things. But in the end, he actually took the side of Trump in saying that, yeah, we think Spain needs to spend more. I mean, and that's also fair that, if you have 31 other allies saying that they're going to spend 5% of their GDP on defense, and you have one who would be protected by all the others, who isn't willing to put that money into their own military, then you can see how that causes some tension between European allies as well. But I think that Trump will very likely try to increase the divisions between Europeans and try to target them, perhaps again, with economic measures. Now, we should point out for everyone that it's not so easy as the Trump administration thinks to put an embargo, I think he used, or trade sanctions just on Spain, because trade is handled at the EU level. It's the entire EU that negotiates tariffs and import duties and trade deals with the United States, not individual countries. So while Trump ordered his staff yesterday to start looking into what they could do to hurt Spain, there's less they can do than he thinks. I have no doubt that they're looking at what they can do to make the Spanish government uncomfortable, but they can't simply isolate them and put trade sanctions on them. I don't doubt they're trying.
Terry Schultz in Brussels, thanks so much for that. That's a very, very interesting turn of events there with Spain's leader. But as you say, a lot going on with Europe and different views that seem to be coming out over the US. Thank you very much. And we will hopefully catch up with you again in the next few days. Let's move now to Israel and speak to our correspondent in Jerusalem, Mariel Muller. We've been talking, of course, that Israel has been carrying out attacks on Iran and also on Lebanon. But before we talk about that, let's just talk about the situation in Israel itself and in Jerusalem, where you are. How are civilians coping with the situation and with the fact that there are these missile and drone attacks being carried out?
Yeah, so every day it has become the reality, basically, of Israelis that they wake up to the sound of the alarm on their phone and then later to the air raid sirens. And you only have a few minutes of time to basically get up, get dressed and run to your shelter if you're lucky and your apartment building has a shelter. If not, then you have to run outside around the corner, if you're lucky. Otherwise, you run several streets to the next public shelter. And this is a disruption, of course, of people's lives here, schools and businesses. Most businesses are also still closed. So you have this weird atmosphere here in the center of Jerusalem, where you have streets that are completely deserted, there's no one. And then you have some streets like here, the main road where our studio is located, where you have some cafes and some supermarkets that are open, people walking down the streets. Yesterday I saw a guy slacklining between two trees, and then again an air raid siren went off, and everybody basically just dispersed and ran to the next shelter. So you have this kind of anxiety, but you also have some sense of normal life. Over the past 2 days, Jewish Israelis have been celebrating the holiday of Purim, which is a very joyful event. People dress up in costumes, there's festive meals and people giving each other gifts. And we've seen scenes of people celebrating in shelters like this, dancing and singing. And so you still have these kind of moments of joy in between this basically, atmosphere of anxiety and uncertainty.
And we are seeing pictures at the moment of some of the attacks on Israel coming from Iran. So I just wanted to ask you how effective Israel's air defense system is and has been in intercepting these incoming missiles and drones.
So the vast majority of missiles that were fired at Israel were intercepted. That's according to the Israeli Defense Forces. They are not willing to give out any numbers, but they say, and you can also hear that, and even if you're not lucky, see that, how the interceptions of drones, of missiles in the air. And so there are only some cases where missiles have pierced through Israel's multi-layered air defense system, which is very sophisticated, has different air defenses for long, middle range and short range missiles. There were cases, for example, building a residential complex in Tel Aviv that was struck, which was basically reduced to rubble by a ballistic missile, and another one just 2 days ago in Beit Shemesh, a town not far from here. A synagogue and also nearby homes were destroyed. 9 people were killed. And so this does happen, and you never know when it's going to happen, but it's rare, but it does happen. So most of the time when large barrages of missiles are being fired at the same time at Israel, then even the sophisticated air defense system is not always able to respond and to completely cover the territory.
Mariel Biresh, it's good to have you providing us those updates. I'm looking at the community chat and people have been asking questions, and I thought I could bring in a question that a user at Siki Machan is asking, and I wonder if this is a question that also some Israelis might be asking. It's a rather big one, but a simple one. She's asking, what does Israel want for Iran?
Well, that's a question that we are also trying to understand, because first, we've seen these attacks, right, on the Iranian leadership. People here, and analysts, observers, also observers who are talking with analysts in the US, they've all thought, okay, the goal is a collapse of the regime, right? And that's out of the question. That's what they've been working on over the past few days. But the question is, are they really working on a regime change? And what does that mean? Because analysts have been saying, look, if they are targeting gatherings of potential next Iranian leaders, who will they negotiate with? There will be no one who can say, okay, you know, let's talk about our nuclear or whatever is left of that. Let's talk about our ballistic missile system and whatever we still have, stockpiles. You know, like, is there any intention to have any kind of deal in the end? So we are also, trying to figure out what is the end game here, and there are still open questions.
And talking about that end game, we've been seeing continuing strikes from Israel on Iran. Do we have any idea who is being targeted in those strikes? I know you talked about the possible next top brass in Iran, but do we know if there have been civilian casualties? Because it's very, very difficult, of course, to get information out of Iran at the moment.
Yeah, so according to the Iranian Red Crescent, there have been more than 700 people who have been killed in American-Israeli strikes on Iran. It's very hard, as you say, to verify anything from there. There has been this huge attack on a girls' elementary school in the south of Iran, in the town of Minab, where the death toll now stands above 110. So it's really unclear. The American and Israeli officials have both said they're not aware that they were the ones who did this, and they're looking into this and they're investigating this. So there was no form of confirmation. And there were now fresh waves of strikes on Iran today that the Israelis have conducted, and they have also said that they have shot down an Iranian fighter jet, that they have overnight also targeted a nuclear facility underground. Command centers, also killed several political and military leaders. So this is ongoing, the operation is ongoing, and it's really hard to put a number on the civilian casualties right now. But the Iranian Red Crescent, as I mentioned, says over 700 already.
And of course, Israel isn't just targeting Iran, but also Lebanon because of the militant group Hezbollah. We do have, I think, some pictures that we can show now, recent pictures anyway, of some of those strikes on Beirut, because in Beirut itself, people have been ordered to leave, I understand, by the Israeli military. What can you tell us more about that?
Exactly. The Israeli military has been sending out warnings throughout these past days, and overnight especially, to villages, several villages, where they say, look, you are in the proximity of Hezbollah, you should evacuate immediately. But we've also heard reports that locations were struck where there has been no warning. But yeah, over the past few hours, we've seen these warnings more and more, especially in southern districts of Lebanon, in southern parts of Lebanon as well. And the Israeli Defense Forces has also moved troops across the border into southern Lebanon. They are saying that they are basically reinforcing the border. They want to make sure that there are no Hezbollah fighters on the other side of the border standing on hilltops and firing missiles and rockets on Israeli communities. But the analysts are also saying this looks like more. This looks like steps of the first steps of a ground invasion. And the Lebanese state media has also now confirmed, basically, or reported that this is what it looks like, a ground invasion, because they have just a few minutes ago reported that the southern town of Qiyam, which is not just a few hundred meters from the border, it's 6 kilometers from the Lebanon-Israel border, that there is continuous artillery shelling ongoing. And so, yeah, we have to see what the developments are in this regard, but it does look like there's a lot of the ground forces of Israel are basically, pushing ahead.
And just to let everybody watching know that we are currently looking at live pictures from Beirut. We can see some smoke there in the far picture, because obviously that's a reaction to some of those strikes that took place earlier, and those strikes are ongoing. I do just have one more question to ask about Lebanon, which is that, of course, there is this difficult dynamic, isn't there, between the government and this militant group Hezbollah. Lebanon has the government has told Hezbollah that it should not be operating, but Hezbollah is obviously ignoring that. How serious, you're talking about the possibility of ground troops coming in, how serious is this for the whole of Lebanon now?
Well, it is a big threat. I mean, Lebanon, the Lebanese leadership, civilians in Lebanon, no one wants this war to spread to Lebanon. It has already happened. Beirut is under attack, as you see there in these images, especially in southern districts. Civilians are fleeing. They're trying to leave Beirut. So it is having a huge impact on the civilian population. And so this is really now a development where we cannot really know what will happen, but the IDF has said basically their goal is to eliminate or to degrade the threat that Hezbollah poses. And they are, of course, seeing this opportunity to basically diminish the capabilities of rockets being fired across the border. So on Monday, when Hezbollah attacked Israel and joined into this war, this was the moment when the IDF basically said, OK, we now go full force and we attack Hezbollah positions wherever they are.
Right, I just wanted to bring in a few comments. This is just, just so that people understand that the mood that's happening in the chat here. We have user James O'Neill, 2933, commenting that Trump is not targeting any country in particular, but rather humanity in general. Another user says, I don't even shed a single tear for the loss of the Iranian leadership. And one question from another user, Fierce TV. I don't know, Marielle, if you can answer this, just asking why Beirut all of a sudden?
Well, because in the southern parts of Beirut, there are Hezbollah bases. Hezbollah also has now dispersed and is trying to, reportedly, is trying to hide in other areas where there are civilians. So, yeah, the IDF is tracking these movements probably, and they are striking where they can find them. But it's really hard to assess from here, obviously. But, yeah, the south of Beirut, these districts that the IDF has been warning civilians to leave. I'm just looking at the latest warning that the IDF spokesperson has put out. And it's basically always the same kind of districts in the south of Beirut, where they basically say, look, you are in proximity of Hezbollah, you have to evacuate now. So we've been seeing repeated tweets from the spokesperson of the IDF, always warning residents of Haret Khreik area, for example, or of Tahrir in Beirut or near Beirut to leave that area and to evacuate as soon as possible. And that's exactly what people are trying to do there.
Yes, and we have seen some of those evacuations taking place over the past couple of days with people in cars and on foot trying to get out. Thank you so much for updating us, Marielle Muller. Stay safe in Jerusalem, and we will be speaking to you again very shortly, I am sure. Thank you very much for joining us. Well, the Gulf states have also found themselves in the front line of this war. Iran has been firing missiles and drones at them, targeting American bases and embassies in the Gulf. This is the US consulate in Dubai, which was hit by an Iranian drone. There was minor damage caused also at the US embassy in Riyadh, which will be coming up shortly, following more Iranian drone attacks, just to prove how far wide some of these attacks from Iran are being. And also, Iran has hit civilian infrastructure. This is Riyadh. This is the US embassy in Riyadh there, and you can see some of the damage that happened there following that strike, but of course it was only minor damage. But Iran has also hit civilian infrastructure, including airports and even hotels. Before we speak to our journalist who is stuck in Dubai, Emily Gordine, let's just listen to somebody who has also been stuck in the United Arab Emirates and is unable to leave, and is just talking about what the situation is like there.
Well, the first night was kind of really scary because it was very unusual. I've lived here for 22 years and we never thought this would happen. We never experienced something like this.
So, Emily, as I said, you're also stuck there. You're not meant to be in Dubai, but you've been unable to leave. Can you just describe what the situation is like on the ground there now with these ongoing missile and drone threats that seem to be coming in day and night?
Well, Dubai has gone very quiet. This is usually a very bustling city. It's full of cars, full of people. And the atmosphere now is very subdued. Of course, tourists are mostly stuck in hotels. Some have been able to leave via Oman. They've traveled to Muscat to leave from the Muscat airport. From there, getting back home to Europe or to Asia. And it's difficult, essentially, because some airlines have reopened from Dubai. So some people have been getting back. The hotel here where we're staying has gotten gradually emptier. So these are positive signs, but it's not clear whether they will be able to continue, how the intensity of this conflict will impact the travel opportunities for people to get out. And that's causing a lot of uncertainty, at least for visitors here. For the residents who live here, it's a slightly different situation because this is their home. They did expect strikes on the UAE specifically because, like many other Gulf states, they are home to US bases, but they didn't expect to become targets themselves. And this new reality has shaken many, even though the Emirati government, of course, is trying to portray strength and stability and trying to convey to people that they are in safe hands.
Yes, but as you yourself say, you have been stuck for some time now, for a few days. Anyway, how does it feel for you being unable to leave? I guess you could go to Oman, but at the moment being stuck in Dubai. Do you feel safe? Do you feel scared of what comes next?
I mean, if you want to leave to Oman, for example, I also want to highlight here that that's very expensive. So we've tried to make several calculations here and trying to get from Dubai to, say, Istanbul, for example, would cost around 2,000 euros. That is a price not everyone can pay. And in terms of safety, I think there are different layers, several layers to that answer. On the one hand, we understand from the Emirati government that they have been very successful at fending off Iranian strikes. We're talking about over 1,000 strikes in total. The large chunk of that is drone strikes, and the Emirati defense forces, the air defense systems have been quite effective. We understand over 90%, 93% of them have been successful. But as you can see in this footage here, some have been getting through, like last night when the US consulate was targeted in Dubai. And what makes you feel slightly uneasy is the fact that, or at least for me, I can speak for myself here, I'm usually based in Jerusalem. In Israel, when there's a missile attack or a drone attack, you have alerts on your phones, you have sirens that go off. Here, you don't have that. And in Israel as well, these warnings are meant to encourage you or are telling you to seek shelter because there is a broad shelter infrastructure in Israel, less so in Arab and Arab villages and cities, but generally speaking, there is a shelter infrastructure. Here again, you don't have that. And that makes you feel uneasy because you don't know, when is it incoming? Is it being intercepted? If you're not used to hearing the explosions, the interceptions in the air, then you also don't know what it sounds like. So for me, from my experience in Israel, I understand, I know the sounds. But many people don't necessarily know what they sound like. So you are essentially, you're not in control. Not that you're not in control, but you are not in control. But you're also not informed a lot of the times about what is happening around you, and that makes me personally, but I think also many others, deeply uneasy.
Emily, can I just ask you a question about, because we were talking about a sense of security, Biresha, by the way, a sense of security, and people in Dubai particularly not used to these kinds of attacks the way people in Israel potentially are. But do you get a sense that the expats or the foreign workers who live in cities like Dubai are now going to be reconsidering their options to potentially relocate out of these kinds of cities that they figured and assumed were safe?
Just to clarify, do you mean that whether the image as Dubai as one of the potentially safest cities in the world, whether that image has been damaged long term?
Exactly, and people are considering relocating out of Dubai?
That's very difficult to tell at this point. I think it depends on the length of these attacks. So far, the Emiratis, from what we understand from them, although they're not always being 100% transparent, they are able to parry a lot of these attacks. Now, how long are they going to, how long are they going to keep up this parrying, this fending off? We don't know. They are reportedly now getting support from the French. We've heard reports about French fighter jets downing Iranian drones over in the United Arab Emirates on Emirati territory. And so I think it depends on a lot of variables. How long is it going to go? What is the intensity going to be like? What is ultimately Iran going to look like in the future? I think there's a growing sense among quite a few Gulf states that this Iranian regime is not sustainable any longer, in the sense that they have tried to find a diplomatic way of dealing with them, of working on diplomatic relations, on a way of living and working together. But now that they're under attack, many of them feel, well, it hasn't worked, or this is not working for us, in a way, you could argue. So I think it depends on a lot of variables. I think right now it's too soon to say. I think if you're in Dubai right now, for example, you can still very much, live your life and I don't want to say pretend everything's fine, but Dubai is a city that provides comfort, that provides an atmosphere of there are no problems here, right? And if you're indoors and you don't recognize the explosions around you, you only hear it on the news, then you might be able to blend out the situation here. Even though, of course, if you look at the stats, if you look at the numbers, over 170 ballistic missiles fired at the UAE, over 700 drones. It is not safe. This is not a safe environment. But in terms of the feeling that the state is creating for people, I think it takes more for people's impression of Dubai to be fundamentally damaged by this. I think we still have to wait on a verdict on that.
And we are looking now at pictures of tourists in Dubai with their cases. As you say, some people have been leaving, have been able to get out, but it has been very difficult for many people. You're talking there about the people who live in Dubai and that it can appear to be a very comfortable city. Of course, there are many migrant workers also in Dubai, making the comfort possible for other people from around the world. What about them? Do they have any choice but to stay in Dubai?
That's a very difficult question to answer at this point, because the flights that are going out, there's a priority list, right? In terms of have you booked beforehand? Can your government potentially also help you in getting out? Some states are carrying out evacuation flights from Oman, some aren't, but still you have to get to Oman. And of course, many migrant workers come to Dubai because they are sending money back home to their families, to feed their families at home. They have economic incentives and reasons to be here. And can they afford to leave? I think a lot of people can't. And so in a way, of course, they are vulnerable. They are stuck here just as everyone else, but they are clearly in a more vulnerable position because they're also financially dependent on being here. We have heard reports of the very wealthy in Dubai who have managed to get, to drive over to Saudi Arabia and charter private jets, and to leave the region. And of course, that is an absolute luxury to be in a position like that, but many people are not. And as I just said, trying to even get to, let's say, Oman and then Istanbul, you're talking about 2,000 euros that you have to pay. That's for ordinary people, that's not easy, and especially for migrant workers who come here from countries like Bangladesh, India, Pakistan, who are making more money than they might be making at home, but it's still not enough to be able to maybe get them out of here.
It's interesting you say that, because it really is a question of money and access. But it's also interesting that that region has seen war and conflict in the past. But I think in recent memory, this is the first time that these Gulf nations have been attacked in this fashion. And I know from personal experience, from my family, for instance, whenever there were a fresh round of hostilities or there were tensions in the region, there was generally a sense of security that, okay, where we are in the Gulf will not be targeted. And therefore, a lot of people, out of an abundance of caution, could fly out, especially migrant workers, for example, to their home nations. You knew that those flights will generally happen around the time of the conflict, and you will not directly be targeted. But that has completely changed. It's almost like the Rubicon has been crossed in this particular instance with this particular war, and we don't know what this portends for the future. I think that's also one of the uncertainties that are coming in. And just one point to address, this is completely different, because there's a lot of discussion in the chat on this. Yeah.
Can I?
Yeah, go ahead.
Can I throw something in there, Biresh?
Yeah,
sorry.
please.
And I just wanted to say that, there is an argument to be made of, the Gulf states have always, for a long time, they've been trying to create a sort of working environment with the Iranians, sort of like working relationships with the Iranians. And of course, you can ask the question of, has that failed? But ultimately, it comes down not necessarily to the Gulf states here. It comes down to US and Israeli interests, because the behavior of the Gulf states, you could argue, has not really changed in the sense that they are very much, they're interested in economic stability. They're not interested in getting militarily involved. In theory, that's what they say. And so it's very much been, they have no interest in creating an environment where, like you say, suddenly they find themselves in the middle of a military confrontation. But what has changed is the calculations on the side of the US and the Israelis, and they have decided that it is worth for them to start attacking Iran. So it's almost, I want to, highlight the fact that if you're looking for blame, if you want, why is that now? Why do the Gulf states find themselves in this position? It doesn't necessarily have to do very much with them. These are calculations that other countries have made. And of course, because of their location and because they have ties with the Americans, with the Israelis in some cases, in other cases, you have Gulf states that haven't even recognized the Israelis as a sovereign state in the Middle East. They have found themselves pulled into this conflict as well.
Emily Gordine, thank you so much for talking to us from Dubai. We do hope that you are able to get out soon, but we do appreciate you being there, so at least you can fill us in on what is happening there. But do please stay safe. So let's speak to somebody else who is in Dubai at the moment, and that is Dina Arakchi. I have been practicing your name, Dina, so I hope I did say that correctly. Dina is an analyst at Control Risk, which is a global risk consultancy firm covering the Gulf Arab region. And we have there just been speaking to one of our journalists who is stuck in Dubai, and she has been explaining what the situation is like for people like her who are unable to get out, or it's extremely difficult for them to get out, and also what a shock this is for Dubai to be under attack, something that it hasn't been used to. What's your position on this? How do you see this, particularly given the fact that you are yourself in Dubai?
So first of all, thank you so much for having me. You pronounced my last name correct.
Hooray!
So
thank you.
for people who are still in this country, we are, for me and my colleagues and other people, my friends, the people that I know, everybody is still here because again the ability to fly out is limited. The airspace is closed, and when there is a flight, there's a priority list. Those who had bookings earlier or stranded tourists, and they're trying to be flown out, and national carriers have been trying to facilitate these flights, these limited flights. However, for people like me and others, it's just monitoring the situation. Sheltering in place is key because of the impact of shrapnel from intercepted missiles in the air, and staying put. Yes, we are hearing explosions from the intercepted missiles, but so far the interception has been high. And we've seen impact on civilian lives limited so far. So this is a good sign, but yeah, it is getting tough, especially for people who moved here who have a certain perception of safety and security. Not that intercepting, just to add on that, the level of interception reaffirms the country's ability to fend off these kind of attacks.
Let me just say to our viewers that we are now looking at a map of the region. Obviously, the yellow is Iran and the red is the Gulf states there. And we are speaking at the moment to Dina Arakshi, who is in Dubai herself, and she is an analyst at Control Risk, a global risk consultancy firm, as we are bringing everybody up to date with what is going on in this Iran war. I guess my next question is, what is Iran trying to do with the Gulf states? Are they trying to cripple them, or are the Gulf states simply collateral damage in this fight with the US and with Israel?
So, in the beginning of the conflict, the majority of Iranian targets have been U.S. military facilities. However, we've seen this pattern expanding to include, for example, U.S.-linked assets, such as the U.S. diplomatic missions. We've seen the U.S. embassy in Riyadh being targeted. We've seen the U.S. consulate in Dubai also being targeted. But with this expansion, this pattern expanding, we've also seen the Gulf's critical national infrastructure being targeted. The oil facility in Fujairah, a fire erupted there because of a fallen shrapnel from an intercepted missile. DXB, Dubai International Airport, was also impacted by the debris. I think as this conflict continues, we're likely to see more. We're likely to see increasingly Iran targeting Gulf's critical national infrastructure, including energy facilities. For Iran, I think it's trying to pressure the Gulf, inflict economic cost on them, and penalizing them for their security cooperation with the U.S.
I just have a question for you, Dina, and I'd also encourage our viewers, our users, to sort of send in their questions, particularly on the theme of the Gulf nations and what they're facing. But my question to you, Dina, why don't the Gulf nations fire back? They clearly have the missiles, they clearly have the munitions, they're being able to intercept Iranian weaponry. Why don't they fire back? Because I would imagine if the combined might of the Gulf nations were to fire back, then this war would end sooner.
I think the Gulf countries' priority that we've seen so far is focusing on their defense capability and exercising restraint. Their focus on making sure their air defense systems intercept the majority of intercept the attacks that are incoming from Iran, and as well making sure that their infrastructure is being protected. As this conflict prolongs, we're likely to see the restrictions that they have in place, which were, for example, not allowing the U.S. to use their military bases and so on, being progressively lifted. And I think the Gulf Air countries are trying to they're using an escalation ladder. They did say that their constraint is limited, will reach a limit. However, that threshold of them actively intervening in an offensive matter is unclear, and I don't think that we've reached that level yet. And also, they're very cognizant that such action will increase their exposure of Iranian retaliation. So that's, I think, the calculus has been so far.
Dina Arakshi, thank you so much for joining us. Thank you for particularly speaking to us from Dubai, where it is obviously a difficult situation there. And thank you for that analysis as we continue to monitor what is going on in this war with Iran. Many thanks. Let me just remind you of what we are talking about and just bring you up to date again with some of the latest developments. Spain's Prime Minister Pedro Sanchez has strongly condemned the US-led war on Iran. He said this is how humanity's great disasters start, and the US could not play roulette with the destiny of millions of people. The Israeli army says it's begun what it's calling broad-scale strikes in Tehran, targeting missile launch sites, air defense systems and command centers. Israel's defense minister has also said any successor to the Ayatollah Khamenei is a target for assassination. And talking about the former Ayatollah, his funeral was due to begin later on Wednesday, and we are just hearing that has been postponed. Israel is also expanding its airstrikes against what it says are Hezbollah targets in Lebanon, and Asian markets are down on fears of the war's disruption of global oil supplies, with shares in South Korea plummeting by 12%. And on that note, Biresh, it's probably a good time for us to talk about that and the whole global impact that this is having, not just on those Gulf states, but also across the world, and particularly focusing on this Strait of Hormuz. So maybe you could just shed some light on that and how that is affecting particularly oil.
I'll do my best, but only because you've asked me to do so. So we're talking about the Strait of Hormuz, and as Alex already mentioned, you can see the impact in Asia. Why? Because, well, a lot of stuff transits through the Strait of Hormuz. Let's just bring up a map of the Strait of Hormuz. A map is always good. Again, Alex told me to bring up this map, so here it is. It's an interactive map. I hope that there is a link to this in the live chat, but if not, we'll try and get it in there. This roughly is the Strait of Hormuz, this little bendy bit in between two landmasses. This here, where the cursor is currently moving, that is Iran, and this here in the south, the Gulf nations, that's the UAE, that's Oman. Let's just try and zoom in a bit. And again, this is a live tracker. So all these dots that you're seeing, where I'm hovering my mouse over, that's basically vessels. Some of them are cargo vessels, some of them are tankers of various things. You can have a look at that once you go onto this webpage. I'm going to try and zoom in, and hopefully my zoom in is good because, well, this mouse pad is rather sensitive and I have thick fingers. So I'm going to try and, right, there we go. I'm going to try and move this out of the way. So you just have a look at where things stand. Now, this particular part over here is rather empty. Now, this is where I'm moving my mouse, if you can have a look. And all around, you find ships basically almost stationary. Some of them are trying to anchor in all of these various anchoring facilities, and some of them are just waiting out in the open ocean because perhaps they don't have a berth, or they're just waiting to figure out what to do. Now, this part here between Iran and the Gulf states is rather empty. And the reason for that is basically the threats that have come out from Iran. You've had the Iranian Revolutionary Guard basically saying that they have complete control of this strait, and they're saying that the Iranian Navy has complete control over it, although you had the US President, Donald Trump, saying, well, the Iranian Navy doesn't exist anymore, but don't take my word for it. Listen to what the US President had to say about that. We have a soundbite. We would like to play that now. At some point.
They have no Navy, it's been knocked out. They have no Air Force, it's been knocked out. They have no air detection, that's been knocked out. Their radar has been knocked out. And just about everything's been knocked out.
Right, so just about everything has been knocked out. So we shouldn't be having this conversation, right? Everything is all hunky-dory, there should be no problem. But guess what? There is a huge problem, as Alex mentioned. Let's start with Asia. Now, I don't know if I can just go back to that map, but if you remember that map, maybe you can just go back to it. You have the Strait of Hormuz that basically connects the Persian Gulf on the left over here and the Gulf of Oman on the right. And then further along, if you move the map along, you'll find you go into the Arabian Sea and then further eastwards into Asia. The reason why Asia is important is because through this a narrow strait, which at its narrowest point is about 33 kilometers wide. That's not very much in nautical terms. That's where about 20% of the world's seaborne oil passes through, and most of it goes to countries in Asia, such as South Korea, Japan, India, China. Alex was talking about South Korea. It has registered its worst ever fall on the Kospi index, about 12%. This is after the index was flying high on AI-led shares, but all that is out the window. The main concerns, I believe I have dropped my fountain pen. The main concerns are there being about the chokehold in the supply of oil. South Korea is the world's fourth largest oil importer. Similar conditions exist for China, India, and Japan as well, although we are hearing that there might be certain exceptions provided to China, but we haven't been able to confirm that. So you've also had a fall on the stock markets in China and Hong Kong. You've also had oil prices that have been rallying on Wednesday as well, up by about 2%. Brent crude is hitting about $84 per barrel. That's the highest apparently since July 2024. The price of diesel has also gone up in Germany. Cyril Ramaphosa, the South African president, warning of supply shocks in Africa and also the increasing prices of energy on the African continent. And here's what's more. You have COSCO, the Chinese shipping container giant. They have stopped bookings to and from the Middle East because a lot of that transits through the Strait of Hormuz. They just don't want to take the risk. There was also talk about insurance being hard to get, ship insurance.
Yes,
and you can see why.
Yeah.
So you have all of that is happening, and you also have this, I don't know if people are viewing this as a weak assurance, but there is an assurance that has come from the United States, from President Trump, who is promising U.S. naval escorts for any ship that wants to transit through the Strait of Hormuz. It's looking rather empty at the moment. And he's also promising the U.S. underwriting insurance for for ships that want to transit through the region. That's what that's what the Strait of Hormuz generally looks like. Rather pretty, but dangerous at the moment.
And quite a promise from Trump, or certainly he hinted at that, didn't he, that his Navy, as in the US Navy, could escort these ships, which, from my understanding, experts are saying would be difficult. It's not something that they can just click their fingers and it's going to happen, and still extremely dangerous.
It isn't. It is extremely dangerous. I mean, we've been in this situation with the Strait of Hormuz before. You had the Houthis in the past years threatening shipping over there. There was this very famous video of them landing a helicopter on a tanker. And then you also have this claim, it's unverified, we haven't been able to verify it, from the Iranians saying that they've targeted at least 10 tankers in the Strait of Hormuz. The point is, even if the Iranians don't have a navy, even if they don't have the boats to actually go up to a tanker, they still appear to have missiles and drones, and that is all you would need with a tanker that is laden with oil. So it is obviously a dangerous situation, and you have the world markets reacting to it. There must certainly be something there. It'll just be worth watching if this assurance from the American president has an impact. But as of now, it doesn't seem to be having an impact in the Asian stock markets that have been active since morning.
And as you say, a lot of these insurance companies refusing to insure these tankers and these ships. So that pretty much makes it impossible for those companies anyway to be anywhere near there. So they're stuck at the moment as they wait to find out.
I mean, this whole thing is a matter of fear, right? It's like, this is an expensive business. If it cannot be safeguarded financially and with actual security, do you go ahead with it? That really is the question for people.
Yeah. Biraj, thank you very much. And all that special research that you've been doing this morning as well on the Strait of Hormuz.
Thanks for the impulse, Alex.
Thank you very much. And we have been, had a good hour's discussion almost with various people from around the region. We've spoken to our correspondent in Jerusalem, also our journalist who is stuck in Dubai. We've also heard from an expert talking about the situation in the Gulf who is also in Dubai. And, of course, we've spoken to Terry Schultz right at the beginning about the impact of all this, with Spain saying that they are not at all happy with what the United States is doing. So I guess that's almost the end for us. Thank you very much for watching this live stream and for us to be able to bring you the very latest on these developments of the Iran war, with Israel continuing to attack not just Iran, but also Lebanon, and Iran, meanwhile, stepping up its attacks on the Gulf states. Do stay with us. You can see more on dw.com, also on our other platforms, including, of course, YouTube, TikTok, and, of course, Instagram. Thank you very much, and thank you to you, Biraj.
Thanks, Alex, and thanks to our community. Thanks so much for watching.